The mysterious trap. Ethan stood still, his boots pressing softly against the cold, rocky ground. The alien world around him was silent, save for the occasional distant hum of strange creatures flying overhead. It was a harsh, unforgiving place, but Ethan had learned to survive here. He had to. No one else would. He had spent years living alone on this desolate planet, a place abandoned by everyone except for wild beasts and hostile alien factions. His survival skills were sharp and his traps finely tuned. Every day, he set new traps, hoping to catch something useful, food, perhaps, or maybe just a glimpse of life other than his own. Today, something felt different. He wasn't sure why, but he could feel the hair on the back of his neck stand up. It was as if the wind itself was warning him. Ethan glanced at his scanner. The small device, a relic from the war that brought him here, flickered for a moment. He checked it again. A signal. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. The scanner was showing a life form. Not just any life form, but something large, something intelligent. It was moving towards him, fast. His breath caught in his throat. This wasn't the usual wildlife. The alien creatures that roamed this planet were nothing compared to what his scanner was picking up now. His fingers twitched, reaching for his rifle, but then he remembered his mission. He wasn't here to fight. He was here to survive. He couldn't risk it. The signal continued to grow stronger, and his mind raced. What could it be? Another hunter from one of the hostile alien factions, or maybe a scout from an alien empire he didn't know about yet. Whatever it was coming right toward him. Ethan quickly set up a trap. His hands moved in practiced, efficient motions. He used vines, rocks, and the leftover tech he had scavenged over the years to create a net that would catch anything big enough to trip it. He hoped it wouldn't be too big, or too strong. As he finished, the signal grew even stronger. Ethan took a deep breath and crouched behind a rock, keeping low. He waited, the tension growing by the second. His eyes darted toward the horizon. What was it? What was out there? Suddenly, there was a noise, a crack, like a branch snapping underfoot. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. It was close. Too close. He held his breath as the sound grew louder. Then, through the fog, he saw it, a figure moving toward him, partially hidden by the thick brush. Ethan's eyes widened. It wasn't a creature. It wasn't even a machine. It was a woman. A tall humanoid figure emerged from the fog. She was covered in armor-like plating, her body slender and graceful but strong. Her eyes, glowing a strange silver, scanned the area with purpose, but there was something else in them. Something vulnerable. She wasn't here to fight. She was here to escape. Ethan's mind raced. Who was she? What was she doing here? She moved closer, and the trap was just a few steps away from catching her. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest. What should he do? Should he let it catch her? Should he confront her? But before he could make a decision, she saw the trap. She stopped and looked directly at it, then back at Ethan with a sharp, piercing gaze. For a moment, their eyes locked, and time seemed to slow. Ethan couldn't tear his gaze away. Her eyes weren't like anything he'd ever seen. There was an intelligence in them, something ancient and far beyond human. She was alien, yes, but not in the way he expected. She wasn't a mindless creature. She was something else entirely. Her voice broke the silence. It was soft, melodic, but filled with fear. Please, don't. Help me. Ethan's heart skipped again. She wasn't just asking for help. She was pleading. Before he could respond, she collapsed to her knees. Her body shook violently, and her silver eyes flickered as if losing focus. She tried to stand, but her legs gave out, and she fell to the ground with a thud. Ethan didn't know what to do. His instincts screamed at him to leave her, to stay away. It was dangerous. She was dangerous. But something in her desperate plea made him hesitate. His hand hovered over his weapon, but he couldn't bring himself to draw it. She looked up at him again, her face pale, her body trembling. "Please," she whispered, barely audible. "Help me, or they will find us both." Ethan's mind raced. Who was she? What did she mean by they? His survival instincts told him to walk away, to let the alien world take care of its own. But there was something in her voice, something that reached deep inside him and made him want to help her. Ethan took a step closer. His feet moved slowly, as if he was afraid that the wrong move might send everything crashing down around him. He bent down, offering her a hand. "I'll help," he said, his voice rough. "But you have to tell me what's going on." The woman's silver eyes flickered once more. She reached up, her hand trembling as she grasped his. "I'm Lyra," she said, her voice weak but urgent. "And I'm not the only one being hunted." The alien's warning. Ethan had barely managed to help the alien woman. Lyra, stand when the ground beneath them trembled. A strange, low hum echoed from the distance, sending a chill down his spine. His heart thudded in his chest, and for the first time in years, a sense of dread gripped him. It wasn't just the wild beasts that haunted this world. No, this felt different. It felt deliberate. Lyra staggered beside him, her breathing shallow and labored. Her skin shimmered faintly in the dim light, and her silver eyes darted nervously to the horizon. Scanning the trees, every few seconds, her eyes flicked back to him, as if ensuring that he hadn't run off. She couldn't stand on her own for long, her body trembling from the injuries she had sustained. "What's happening?" Ethan asked, his voice rough but urgent. He didn't know if she was in shock or if the wild planet was playing tricks on him, but he had to know what was going on. The weight of her silence only increased the tension. "They're coming," Lyra whispered, barely audible over the hum in the air. "They know where I am now." Ethan's eyes narrowed. He couldn't see anyone. Nothing but trees, fog, and the flickering shadows cast by the low-hanging clouds. But there was something in the way she spoke, something that told him she wasn't just talking about the weather. "Who's coming?" he pressed. "What do you mean?" Lyra took a deep breath, her hand gripping his arm for support. She stood a little taller, but her voice was shaky. "The hunters, they are not from this world." She paused, as if considering whether or not to reveal more. "They've been tracking me for a long time. If they catch me, they'll use me as a weapon." Ethan's mind raced. He had seen his fair share of dangers in this place: hostile creatures, unpredictable storms, alien ships buzzing overhead. But this was different. Something about the way Lyra spoke sent a shiver down his spine, and the mention of being used as a weapon made his stomach turn. "I don't understand," Ethan muttered, looking around again. His hand instinctively went to the rifle slung over his shoulder. "What's so special about you? Why do they want you?" Lyra's silver eyes locked onto his, her gaze intense. "I carry something they need, something very powerful. But it's not just me they want. They'll burn everything to get it." Her voice cracked slightly, as though the weight of her words was too much to bear. "I'm not the first one they've hunted down, and I won't be the last." Ethan felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. This was more than just a simple rescue mission. This was a warning. Before he could respond, a faint sound broke through the air, like the snap of a twig beneath heavy boots. Lyra froze, her eyes wide with fear. She didn't even have to say it. Ethan could feel it too. The air had changed. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was waiting for something terrible to happen. "They're close," Lyra whispered, her body stiffening in panic. Ethan turned sharply, his eyes scanning the misty forest for any sign of movement. There was nothing at first, no shapes, no shadows moving between the trees. But then he caught a glimpse, a faint shimmer. Something, or someone, was out there, cloaked in the mist. His heart pounded in his chest as he backed away slowly, pulling Lyra with him. He wasn't sure what exactly was coming, but he could feel it in his bones. This wasn't going to be a simple fight. The sound of footsteps grew louder, closer, and then, from the fog, something emerged. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. At first he thought it was just a trick of the light, but then he saw it clearly, several figures, humanoid but wrong, moving with eerie precision. They were covered in sleek, dark armor that shimmered under the pale light, blending with the fog around them. They weren't like the aliens Ethan had encountered before. These beings didn't have the clumsy, brutish nature of the wild creatures or the unpredictability of scavengers. They were methodical, like hunters closing in on their prey. "They found us," Lyra muttered, her voice hollow with defeat. Ethan's grip tightened on his rifle. He didn't know what they were or where they came from, but he wasn't about to just give up. "We need to move. Now." Lyra's hand found his again, this time with more urgency. Her eyes were wide with fear. "No, we can't run. If they catch us, it will be worse than death." Ethan frowned, confused. "What do you mean worse than death?" They use our kind," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "They break us, turn us into weapons. You'll never be the same. I've seen it. I've watched it happen." The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. He wasn't just protecting a woman from alien hunters. He was trying to stop something far worse, something that could change everything about the balance of power in the galaxy. Ethan took a step back, his mind spinning. The weight of the situation started sinking in. Whatever Lyra was carrying, whatever these hunters wanted, it was bigger than anything he had ever dealt with before, and he had just gotten caught in the middle. The hunters close in. The air was thick with tension as Ethan pulled Lyra behind a large boulder, his heart racing in sync with the heavy footsteps drawing nearer. The mist in the forest grew thicker, swirling around them like a living thing, as though the very planet was conspiring to hide them from the hunters. Ethan's breath was shallow, but he forced himself to stay calm. He had faced danger before, but this felt different. The urgency in Lyra's voice, her trembling hands, nothing about this felt ordinary. "We don't have much time," Lyra whispered, her eyes flicking nervously toward the shadows. "They can track us even through this fog." Ethan nodded but didn't take his eyes off the dark shapes moving through the mist. The hunters were getting closer, and it was clear they weren't like anything he'd seen before. Their movements were precise, calculated. They didn't stumble through the fog like animals. They moved as if they owned it, as if they knew exactly where they were going. These weren't just creatures from the wild. They were soldiers, and they were hunting them. Lyra's hand tightened around his wrist, pulling him back further into the shadows. "Stay quiet," she urged, "and stay low." Ethan obeyed, dropping to his knees and glancing around. He could barely make out their forms now, only faint outlines, but the tension in the air was undeniable. The hunters were closing in, and he could hear the soft clicking noises of their armor as they adjusted position. "What are they?" Ethan asked in a whisper, his voice barely audible over the distant hum of alien ships above. Lyra didn't answer right away. Her silver eyes darted between the approaching figures, and her lips pressed into a thin line. "They're called the Tail. They come from a distant galaxy. They're merciless, and they've been hunting me for months." Ethan's frown deepened. "Why? What do they want with you?" Lyra hesitated. "It's not just me. It's what I'm carrying." She glanced at him quickly, her gaze filled with both fear and something else, a strange kind of resolve. "The artifact. It's a power source, one that can change the balance of the entire galaxy. If they get their hands on it, they'll use it to conquer worlds." The realization hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. He had no idea what kind of power this artifact held, but the exhale didn't seem like the type to let anything go. They wanted it, and they would stop at nothing to get it. "They're almost here," Lyra whispered again, her voice trembling. "We can't fight them head-on. They'll tear us apart." Ethan's mind raced. He didn't have much time to think. The Exhale were getting closer, and their technology was far beyond anything he'd seen. Their weapons, their armor, everything about them screamed danger. But Ethan wasn't going to give up that easily. "We can't outrun them," he said under his breath, glancing at the traps he had set earlier. "But maybe we can outsmart them." Lyra looked at him, her eyes wide with surprise. "What do you mean?" Without another word, Ethan began pulling at the straps on his bag. He grabbed a few odd tools, leftover tech, and pieces of the environment around him. He had learned over the years that survival in a place like this wasn't just about brute strength. It was about using everything you had to your advantage. He set to work quickly, silently. The traps he had set earlier were designed to catch animals, not alien hunters, but he could modify them. It wouldn't stop the sale entirely, but it could give them a chance. Lyra watched him for a moment before turning her attention back to the approaching figures. The exhale were getting closer, their movements more deliberate now. It was as if they knew something was amiss. "They're not stupid," Lyra murmured. "They'll figure out our position soon." Ethan didn't reply. He was too focused on the task at hand. He finished his adjustments, quickly setting a new trap near the hunter's path. He'd have to be quick. The exhale had already noticed something was off. One of them stopped and looked in their direction. Its helmet glowed with a soft red light, scanning the area. Ethan's pulse quickened. He didn't have much time. He motioned to Lyra to get low. They both crouched, holding their breath as the tattle soldier took a few steps closer. Ethan's fingers hovered over the trap. If he could just get them to move closer, he could trigger it. The plan was simple: spring the trap when they least expected it, and use the chaos to slip away. The XL soldier moved another few steps forward. Ethan's fingers twitched. He had only one shot at this. Then, just as the soldier stepped into the trap's range, Ethan pressed the button. There was a loud snap, followed by a hiss of escaping air, and the trap sprang to life. Metal coils shot out from the ground, wrapping around the soldier's legs and torso, sending it crashing to the ground. The other exhale reacted immediately, their weapons raised. But it was too late. Ethan had already set another trap, a flashbang that went off with a blinding burst of light and sound. For a moment, everything was chaos. The exhale stumbled, disoriented by the explosion, giving Ethan and Lyra the precious seconds they needed. Without wasting any time, they bolted. The forest blurred around them as they ran, their breaths coming in quick gasps. Ethan's mind was racing, but he couldn't afford to slow down. They had to get to higher ground, somewhere they could regroup and plan their next move. Behind them, the exhale recovered quickly, their growls of frustration echoing in the distance. Ethan didn't look back. He knew they wouldn't give up easily. But as he pushed forward, one thought kept gnawing at the back of his mind. This was just the beginning. The exhale were only getting started, and whatever was in that artifact, whatever it meant to them, was about to drag them both into something far bigger than either of them had ever imagined. A desperate escape. The cave was cold, its dark mouth gaping wide as Ethan and Lyra scrambled inside, the echoes of their footsteps swallowed by the thick stone walls. They had outrun the exhale for now, but they both knew it wouldn't last. The sounds of pursuit were fading, but that didn't mean they were safe. Ethan pushed forward into the deeper recesses of the cave, guiding Lyra by the arm. The mist was still thick outside, a cover for their flight, but it wouldn't be long before the exhale's advanced tracking systems would find them again. They had barely gotten a few miles into the cave system before they were forced to stop, gasping for breath. Lyra leaned against the cold wall, her silver eyes closed, exhaustion and pain clear on her face. Her earlier panic had subsided, replaced by a quiet resignation. But Ethan knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. "We're not safe here," Lyra said, her voice hoarse but steady. She opened her eyes and stared at him. "The exhale won't stop, not until they have me. And the artifact." Ethan didn't speak for a moment, his mind racing. He'd known that, of course. But there was something in Lyra's voice now that made him wonder if there was more to the story than she had let on. She had said the artifact was powerful, something that could change the galaxy. But what did that really mean? And why was she so important? "You still haven't told me everything, have you?" Ethan asked, his voice low. He couldn't help it. There was something about her, something in the way she held herself, that made him feel like she was holding back crucial information. Lyra's eyes flickered, but she didn't look away. She shook her head, almost sadly. "There's no time for stories now. All you need to know is that the Exhale, they're not like us. They don't just want the artifact. They want control. They will stop at nothing to get it. If they have it, they can turn worlds into nothing more than husks." Ethan frowned. It didn't make sense. How could an artifact do all that? It didn't add up. But one thing was clear. The Exhale were determined. They had technology, tactics, and power far beyond anything he'd seen. They wouldn't stop until they had Lyra and the artifact. "We can't stay here long," he said, pulling himself out of his thoughts. "They'll find us, no matter what." Lyra nodded. "Yes, we have to move. But we can't go back the way we came. They'll be waiting. The only way is deeper into the caves." Ethan hesitated. The caves were a labyrinth of twists and turns, dangerous in their own right. The last thing he wanted was to get lost. But if they had any chance of escaping the Exhale, they had to take risks. "Lead the way," he said, motioning for her to go first. Lyra took the lead, her eyes scanning the shadows, her movements slow but deliberate. She seemed to know exactly where she was going. Ethan followed closely behind, his senses on high alert. Every step felt like it could be their last. The further they went, the darker and colder the cave became. The walls grew more jagged, the air thicker with moisture, and the faint sound of dripping water echoed through the tunnels. It was a strange, eerie place, silent except for their footsteps and the occasional distant rumble of an alien storm brewing above. After what felt like hours of winding through the cave, Lyra stopped suddenly. She held up her hand, signaling for Ethan to stop. Her eyes scanned the darkness, then slowly shifted toward a small alcove in the wall. "This way," she whispered, beckoning him. Ethan followed her to the alcove, which looked like it had once been a part of some long-forgotten structure. Faint markings were etched into the walls, symbols that meant nothing to him. They glowed faintly, casting a weak light into the otherwise impenetrable darkness. "What is this place?" Ethan asked quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra didn't answer right away. She reached out and touched one of the symbols, her fingers brushing over the glowing lines. The markings pulsed, and a low hum filled the air. Then, with a soft hiss, a section of the wall slid open, revealing a narrow passageway beyond. "This is the hidden way," she said softly, her voice almost reverent. "The Exhale will never find it. Not unless they know exactly what they're looking for." Ethan glanced back at the entrance to the alcove, his mind racing. He had no idea how Lyra knew about this place, or how she'd even found it. But he didn't have time to question it. The Exhale were still on their trail, and the clock was ticking. Without another word, they slipped through the opening into the dark passageway beyond. The air inside the passageway was thick with the scent of ancient stone and damp earth. It was narrow, too narrow to be comfortable, but they pushed on, deeper into the heart of the cave. The walls seemed to close in around them, the space growing smaller and smaller. Lyra's pace quickened as she moved further into the passage, her hand still pressed to the stone. Ethan followed closely behind, trying to shake the growing unease that settled in his stomach. He couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't just running from the Exhale anymore. They were running toward something else, something even more dangerous. And as they moved deeper, the walls around them began to shift, the glowing symbols on the stone changing in response to their presence. The cave was alive, and they were beginning to realize they weren't just in a place of refuge. They were in a place of power. Lyra didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her silence told him everything he needed to know. This wasn't just about escaping the Exhale. This was about something far bigger than either of them. And whatever it was about to change everything. The artifact's secret. The narrow passageway twisted, and turned like a serpent in the dark, its walls seeming to shift and pulse with an unnatural energy. Ethan's feet echoed loudly against the stone floor as they pushed deeper into the labyrinth. His mind raced, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. One moment, he was a lone survivalist on an alien world, focused only on his day-to-day existence. The next, he was trapped in a deadly game with alien hunters and an artifact that could reshape the galaxy. Lyra moved ahead of him with quiet determination, her pace steady despite her earlier injuries. The faint light from the glowing symbols on the walls cast a soft, eerie glow, and her silver eyes seemed to catch the light in a way that made her look almost otherworldly. The further they went, the more the passage seemed to hum with energy, and the air grew thicker, charged with something Ethan couldn't quite understand. "Where are we going?" Ethan asked, his voice low as it reverberated off the walls. Lyra didn't turn to answer him immediately. She was focused, her gaze fixed ahead, as though she could see something in the darkness that he couldn't. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity of silence, she spoke. "There's a place ahead. It's a sanctuary, hidden from the exhale," she said, her voice tight with urgency. "But it's not just a hiding spot. It's a key." "A key to what?" Ethan asked, feeling his curiosity grow despite the overwhelming danger. "To everything," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "The artifact. It's more than just a weapon. It's the key to an ancient power, one that could change the course of this galaxy, and the Exhale want it, not just for the power it gives, but because of what it can unlock." Ethan frowned, trying to process what she was saying. The Exhale were ruthless, but for them to pursue her across the galaxy for so long, it had to be more than just a powerful weapon. They weren't after just the artifact. They were after the secrets it held, secrets that could turn the tide in their war. "You're telling me that this artifact could destroy worlds?" Ethan asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. Lyra stopped abruptly, turning to face him. Her silver eyes locked onto his, intense and full of an emotion he couldn't quite place. "No, it could unite them." Ethan blinked, confused. "Unite? How?" She took a deep breath, her hand resting against the wall, as if seeking strength from the very stone itself. "The artifact holds the knowledge of an ancient civilization, one that existed long before the Exhale ever came to power. They were beings of incredible intelligence, capable of bending the laws of physics and time itself. They created the artifact to bridge the gaps between the different races of the galaxy, to bring them together in peace." Ethan shook his head. "Peace? And you think the Exhale are interested in that? They've been conquering planets for centuries." Lyra's gaze softened slightly. "They were once a peaceful species too, but that was before they found the artifact, before they realized its power. Now, they see it as the ultimate tool for control. If they unlock its full potential, they can command entire galaxies, rewriting history itself." Ethan felt a chill creep up his spine. He had known the Exhale were dangerous, but he hadn't realized just how much they had already uncovered about the artifact. If they found it, if they could control it. A loud rumble echoed through the cave, shaking the walls around them. Ethan instinctively reached for his rifle, his heart racing. He knew that sound all too well. The Exhale were close, too close. "They'd found us," Lyra whispered urgently, her voice cracking. "We don't have much time. We need to get to the heart of the sanctuary, before they do." Without another word, they both started running again, the sound of their footsteps barely audible over the growing noise of the Exhale's heavy boots and the echo of their hunters' calls. The walls of the cave seemed to narrow around them, but Lyra didn't slow down. She moved with purpose, her eyes fixed on something far ahead. Ethan's chest tightened with each passing step. He didn't know where this path was leading, but it felt like they were running toward something far greater than just a hidden cave. The air was thick with energy, as if the walls themselves were alive with power. The deeper they went, the more Ethan could feel it. Something ancient, something not of this world. It was as if the cave itself was a living entity, guarding its secrets. Finally, they reached a large open chamber. The walls here were lined with intricate carvings, depicting alien creatures, symbols, and what looked like celestial events. In the center of the chamber stood a massive stone structure, shaped like an altar, with grooves etched into its surface. The artifact pulsed in Lyra's hand, its soft glow lighting the room. "This is it," she breathed, her voice full of awe. "The heart of the sanctuary." Ethan stood at the entrance, watching as Lyra approached the altar. He didn't know what to expect, but the power in the air was undeniable. It was as if the very space around them was alive with energy, and he felt an overwhelming urge to stay back, to not touch anything. Lyra carefully placed the artifact onto the stone structure, and the moment it touched the surface, the chamber trembled. The walls began to glow, the symbols shifting and rearranging themselves as the entire room seemed to come to life. Ethan stepped back, his eyes wide with shock. The artifact wasn't just a weapon or a key. It was the doorway to something far greater, something that the XL could never fully understand unless they unlocked its secret. And just as the chamber came to life, the ground beneath them shook violently. The XL had arrived. But it was too late. The artifact had already begun its awakening. The final showdown. The ground trembled violently as Ethan and Lyra stood frozen in the heart of the chamber. The artifact on the stone altar glowed with an intensity that lit up the entire room, its hum filling the air like a low, resonating heartbeat. The walls around them pulsed with an ancient energy, shifting and rearranging, as though the entire structure was awakening from a long slumber. Lyra's silver eyes were wide with awe and fear as she stared at the artifact. "It's happening. It's awakening." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He had no idea what he was witnessing, but he could feel the power in the air, thick and tangible, like the very fabric of the universe was bending in response. The XL were close, but the artifact wasn't waiting for them. It had its own agenda. And then it happened. A low rumble echoed from the far side of the chamber, followed by a sharp hiss of pressure building somewhere deep within the walls. The XL had breached the outer defenses. Their mechanical footsteps were unmistakable, thundering through the corridors, drawing nearer. "They're almost here," Lyra said, her voice trembling as she took a step back from the altar. She looked at Ethan, her expression conflicted. "If the XL activate the artifact, it will be too late. They'll harness its power, and nothing will stop them." Ethan's heart raced as he turned to face her, trying to process the urgency of her words. "But if they can't activate it, they'll never stop hunting you. You have to do something. Anything." Lyra's gaze softened, but her eyes were haunted by a realization. She knew what she had to do. She had always known, but now, in the face of the XL's impending arrival, there was no more room for hesitation. The truth had to come out. "I can't let them control it, Ethan," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "The artifact is more than just a tool. It's a consciousness, an ancient being. It's not meant for domination or destruction. It's meant to unite, but in the wrong hands." The sound of approaching footsteps grew louder, the exhale drawing closer by the second. Ethan's mind raced as he glanced between Lyra and the altar. He knew that Xel had advanced technology, but there was something about the way she spoke that made him fear the artifact's potential even more. "How do we stop them?" he asked, his voice low, almost pleading. Lyra hesitated for a moment before taking a deep breath. "There's a failsafe, but it requires a blood sacrifice. It's the only way to keep the Xel from seizing the artifact's power." She turned to him, her gaze intense. "I'm the one who activated the artifact's core, and I'm the one who must make the sacrifice. There's no other way." Ethan stepped back, shocked by the gravity of her words. A blood sacrifice. He didn't know if he could stand by and let that happen, but he knew one thing for sure: they were running out of time. A voice, distorted and cold, echoed through the chamber. The Xel were speaking, their language unfamiliar but unmistakable. They were close, and they had come prepared. "There's no time left," Lyra said, her voice urgent now. "You have to trust me, Ethan. I have to stop them, or everything will fall apart." Without waiting for his response, Lyra stepped forward, placing her hand over the artifact once more. The energy in the room seemed to intensify, the hum of the artifact now vibrating through the very ground beneath their feet. It was alive, but not in the way Ethan had thought. It was ancient, sentient, and it responded to Lyra's touch. The Excel's voices echoed louder, and suddenly the entrance to the chamber burst open. The Excel soldiers stood at the threshold, their armored forms towering in the doorway, weapons drawn and aimed directly at Ethan and Lyra. Lyra's eyes flashed as she turned to face them, but she didn't move away from the artifact. She was locked in place, her hand still resting on its surface. "Get back," one of the Excel warriors barked, his voice distorted by the hiss of a mechanical filter. "The artifact belongs to us. Stand down." Ethan's pulse spiked, his fingers twitching near his weapon. He didn't know how much time they had before the Exale launched an attack. His grip tightened, ready for anything. But Lyra didn't flinch. She was focused, her expression unreadable. The artifact's hum grew louder, and the walls around them vibrated with power. "Lyra, no," Ethan shouted. But she didn't hear him. She had already made her choice. With one final breath, she pressed her palm against the artifact's glowing surface, and the chamber seemed to erupt. The walls exploded in a cascade of light, the symbols on the stone glowing brighter than ever. The Exale soldiers recoiled, their eyes wide with confusion and panic as the power of the artifact surged outward. Ethan watched, stunned, as the very air around them twisted, the space between them, and the Exale warping and bending as if time itself was folding in on itself. Lyra's eyes shone with a strange light as she let out a quiet cry. A sudden wave of force erupted from the artifact, knocking the Exale soldiers back as if they were mere toys. The air crackled, and the entire cave seemed to come alive with a blinding white light. The Exale screamed, but their voices were swallowed by the sound of the artifact's power. Ethan barely had time to register what was happening before everything around him shifted. The Exale's weapons fizzled out, their technology failing, as the artifact's energy overwhelmed them. But just as quickly as the light flared, it disappeared, leaving behind an eerie silence. And then, all at once, the chamber fell still. Lyra collapsed to her knees, her breath ragged, as the light from the artifact dimmed. Ethan rushed to her side, his heart pounding in his chest. Her body was limp, but her eyes were open, her silver gaze staring blankly at the stone floor. "You did it," Ethan whispered, but there was no joy in his voice, only a hollow sense of finality. Lyra smiled weakly, her voice barely a breath. It had to be done, and as the chamber fell into a deep silence, Ethan realized something he hadn't expected. The battle wasn't over. This was only the beginning. A new purpose. The silence in the chamber was deafening. Ethan knelt beside Lyra, his fingers trembling as he checked for signs of life. Her pulse was weak but steady, and her shallow breaths were the only sound in the still air. The once blinding light from the artifact had faded to a soft glow, casting strange shadows across the stone floor. The Exale soldiers lay scattered around the room, their once dangerous weapons now lifeless and inert. Ethan felt a weight in his chest. He didn't know if it was relief or something darker. Lyra had given everything to stop the Exale, to keep the artifact from falling into their hands. But now, in the quiet aftermath, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, something far larger than he had anticipated. Lyra stirred slightly, her silver eyes fluttering open. Her gaze locked onto him, faintly puzzled, as if she wasn't sure where she was or how much time had passed. "Ethan," her voice was soft, barely above a whisper. "Did it work?" Ethan nodded, swallowing hard. "You stopped them. They're gone." For a moment, Lyra's eyes softened with a hint of satisfaction. But then the realization hit her. She tried to push herself up, but her body was weak, exhausted from the energy she had just released. The artifact, she murmured, looking up at the altar. It's not just a weapon. It's a doorway, Ethan. A connection to something much older, much larger than the exhale. Ethan frowned, still struggling to comprehend what had just happened. I don't understand. What do you mean, a doorway? Lyra's gaze turned distant, as if she were seeing something far beyond the stone walls of the chamber. The artifact was never meant to be used for war or control. It was created by an ancient race, one that spanned the stars. They built it to unite the galaxy, to connect all the species. It's not just a tool. It's a key to something greater, something that could change the fate of every living being in this universe. Ethan stood, his eyes scanning the now quiet chamber. The Exhale were defeated, their threat neutralized, but the mystery of the artifact lingered like a heavy fog in the air. Lyra was right. The artifact's true purpose wasn't just to stop one enemy. It had the potential to reshape the entire galaxy. He turned back to her, the weight of her words sinking in. And now? What happens now? Lyra's gaze remained fixed on the altar. She seemed to be contemplating something far beyond the immediate dangers they had just faced. The artifact has already chosen, Ethan. It's connected to the galaxy's very foundation. And it has decided. It will bring the galaxies together, but only if they are ready. The Exhale were a warning. They are not the last to seek control over the artifact's power, but they are the first to learn that it cannot be tamed by force. Ethan's mind was racing. The Exhale were just one faction in a universe full of conflict. The artifact was too powerful to fall into the wrong hands again. And now, the responsibility fell to Lyra. And by extension, to him. But how do we know if the galaxy is ready? He asked, his voice low. Lyra's silver eyes met his, and for the first time, she seemed vulnerable. We don't. But I've seen the way the universe works, Evan. I've seen how it bends, how it struggles, and how it fights for survival. It's up to us to ensure that the artifact's power is used wisely. We must guard it, protect it, and show the galaxy that unity is the only way forward. Ethan felt a deep sense of purpose settle in his chest. He had never imagined himself as someone who could shape the future of entire galaxies. He was just a survivor, someone who had lived alone on a harsh alien world. But now, with the Exhale defeated and the artifact's true potential revealed, he realized he had no choice but to become more, to fight for something greater than himself. You're not alone, Ethan said, the words coming out stronger than he expected. We'll figure this out together. Whatever happens next, we'll make sure the artifact is used for the right reasons. Lyra nodded slowly, her expression softening. Thank you, Ethan. You don't know what this means. Just as she spoke, the faintest shimmer of light filled the air. The artifact's glow intensified again, but this time, it was not the blinding flash of power from earlier. It was a soft, inviting light, like a beacon calling to the stars. Ethan and Lyra both looked at the artifact, their eyes filled with awe. It's reaching out, Lyra said, a sense of wonder in her voice. It's asking for something. Ethan stepped closer, his heart pounding. The light from the artifact pulsed again, as though it were alive, drawing them in. It wants to connect. Lyra whispered, her voice filled with both fear and hope. It wants to unite the galaxy, if we let it. Ethan stood there, staring at the artifact's light. He didn't know what the future held or what steps they would have to take next. But one thing was clear. The artifact wasn't just a key to the galaxy's past. It was the key to its future. And with that, Ethan knew they couldn't keep running. The galaxy was watching. And whatever came next, they would face it together. It was no longer just about survival. It was about building something greater, a future where all species, all races, could come together. And it would start with them.